Listen and practice.
How to speak English fluently. How I became a fluently English speaker alone. Now I'm sure that you have had moments in your learning where you have felt like you progressed very quickly, it comes easily, you're motivated. It's fun, but at some point you hit a wall and you feel like you'll never speak fluently confidently, and naturally you are not alone. This feeling of being stuck is often called the intermediate plateau, and I've been there. It can be a comfortable place you can speak and understand in many situations, but for most of us it's not enough. We want to enjoy the language as freely as we do our mother tongue as a native. I've never had the experience of learning English as a second language, so I want to bring you an expert who has successfully. Together here at Real Life English, and if you listen to our podcast, chances are you have already heard me on there, but today I'm here to tell a little bit of my story and how I went from speaking zero English to the level of English I have today. I'm just like you, I'm an English learner myself, and I had to learn English from scratch in my country here in Brazil. I've never been abroad, so I'm gonna tell you how I did it, and hopefully that's going to give you some ideas and inspiration for your English journey. So now let's get started. So my story with English began when I was 15 years old, and as I told you, I come from Brazil, and at that time I knew zero English, you know. I couldn't speak anything, I couldn't read, I couldn't write, but I'm a 15 something magical kind of happened because I started to have this desire to become bilingual. I don't know exactly why that was, but the idea of using two languages to communicate, to express myself, was very attractive to me. And I remember also that I looked around me, you know, I saw my family, my friends, you know, my social circle, and I realized that no one knew English. So I started to associate also the idea of knowing English with having a better life or having school. He took an English course and he was really helpful because I talked to him and he was kind enough to lend me his old course books, you know, because every semester his school would change the books, so the books that he wouldn't use anymore, he will lend them to me. So that's how I started. I started by studying with old course books from my friend and a grammar book that he had lent me. Foreign studying by myself with those old books, you know, and I remember that I was really fascinated because English was always interesting to me. I always loved the language, but I was then actively studying it, right? I mean, I was reading stuff in English, I was copying stuff from the book that I saw, and I was already very excited because I was using another language to write or to communicate or to express myself. My speaking was really bad at that time, you know, so I couldn't speak yet, even though I grew up kind of watching movies with my parents in English and listening to music in English as well. I didn't have my speaking skills so developed, yet I remember that I would try to read stuff out loud from the books that I was studying with, and it was a disaster because, you know, the words wouldn't flow. I had no idea how to pronounce certain words. For example, lo lab do, you know, it was really bad and frustrating, but I kept going because at the end of the day, that was all I did for pretty much 3 years, you know, from 15 to 18. Most of the time, I would study with books, and that was the first mistake I made, and I'm here to tell you this because I took way too much time to long to start speaking. You don't want to do that, and at that time 20 years ago, it was much more difficult to find people to practice my speaking with, so I just studied with books at that time. But nowadays, we have so many more cool resources, you know, like apps. And thinking of apps, I can tell you about the Real Life English app, as you probably know. And with the app you can have conversations with people from all around the world at the touch of a button, plus you can listen to our podcast there, and with the transcripts it's just amazing. So if you haven't downloaded the app yet, make Sure, you do that because you know that is one of the resources that, for example, I wish I had when I was learning English and trying to improve my speaking 20 years ago, music. But then, something magical happened in my life when I turned 18. I started working, and I have to say that my work experience, you know, the jobs that I've had in my life, they were crucial in my English development, especially the speaking and the listening skills. Let me explain. My first job was at a drugstore, and I worked as a cashier there, but there was something interesting about that drugstore because that peers, they would see me at lunchtime kind of eating and studying at the same time, so pretty quickly I became the English guy at the drugstore, so every time a foreign customer came in, I was the one to be called, "Hey, Chicago, there's a foreign person there, a foreign customer, go help that person." Then I would go there and then speak in English with those people and try to help them out right. I remember one time it was kind of funny, you know, I was at the cash register and I was talking to this American customer. She was a lady, and then you know I was trying to talk to her in English and explain to her that I had never been abroad and everything, but I was still learning the language, and then said, "Oh yeah, I've never been abroad," and then she kind of stopped me, and then she said, "Oh, I think you mean abroad," and I was like, "Oh, abroad, oh, thank you very much for the corruption, I appreciate that." So that was one example, yeah, of how having these little interactions with these customers helped me, because you know sometimes I would say something wrong like abroad, and then the person would help me by correcting me, and I had many of these small interactions at that time that were really useful. And this is another tip that I can give you: be open to correction, because if somebody corrects your English or your pronunciation or the way you use a word, this is actually great for speaking to Americans on the phone 6 hours a day, 6 days a week for a year. So that in a way it was my version of living abroad, you know, it was my version of having an exchange program, because I was really speaking to natives for a year, yeah, and that really helped me with my speaking skills and my listening skills. But it's important to mention that I only got that job because I already knew English enough to get that job, so all those years that I spent before, you know, working and studying and learning paid off, because those years allow me to get this job, and then I improved even more. So here's why I have to say to you: keep learning, keep developing yourself, and start looking for job opportunities that allow you to use your English on a daily basis, because then you're going to improve even more. And between those jobs, that was actually the moment when I really started to create my own immersion in English now, because I was already kind of using English on my daily routine there at work, and then I was really serious about it, like, you know, everything I made sure that I did in English, so watching movies in English, series, listening to music, love rock and roll, for example, so you know, I always listened to my favorite bands in English, and with my very first paychecks, actually that's what I did. We didn't have Netflix at that time or streaming services, so I actually would go to media to learn English. By the way, if you want to learn or to know my exact step-by-step process that I used to improve my English with movies and TV series, let us know in the comments. Maybe I can make another video in the future for you explaining how I did it all right. Finally, there is one weird thing that happened in my life that really helped me take my English to the next level. And that was becoming an English teacher. You know, I started teaching English at 21 years old, so it's been 14 or 15 years now already, and I have to say that teaching English and helping people with their English was actually an experience that really helped me master the English language to a whole nother level, because you know, when you teach, it's like you are learning again, you know, because if I have to teach a class or help someone, I have to prepare, right? I have to study the topic myself. I have to be familiar with the topic. I have to think of different ways to explain things to give examples. And that mental process really helps me better understand the topic, so then I can explain that to my students, so it's a win-win. If you teach somebody, you win because you are kind of revised information and studying it again. And the other person is also benefiting because the person is learning new stuff with you, and I've had the pleasure of working with wonderful, more experienced teachers over the years.